going to start with a short story, the story of Peter. Peter was someone I met while I was doing research, following up people in recovery over a course of 4 years. And I remember well that I met Peter for the very first time in 2010, and he was 55 years old then. And it was one of the first days of spring, and the air seemed filled with opportunity. And I remember well that we were sitting in the office of his treatment provider, and the room was infused with the smell of bad coffee and yesterday's cigarette smoke. And Peter was sitting there together with me, and he was sharing his life story. He told me that he started using drugs when he was 12 years old, and by the age of 20, he was a daily heroin user. He lived on the streets of Antwerp all day, all night. But that day in 2010, he was very proud. He was proud because he was in recovery. He was sober for more than 15 years. And he told me that he had 2 new goals in his life. The first one was that he wanted to regain contact with his son, Louis. And the second one was a very clear statement. He told me, I choose to be alive. I would like to grow old peacefully, without drugs and without living on the streets. As the years went by, I saw Peter a couple of times, and every time I saw him, he grew closer and closer to meeting his life goals. And then in 2014, we had a meeting, or I wanted to have a meeting with him to have that final follow-up interview. And I tried to contact him, but he didn't answer his phone, not during the day, not during the night. So I tried to contact one of his emergency contacts, his friend Paul. And after a while, Paul answered me very briefly, well, I'm very sorry that I am the one to bring you this news, but Peter died of a heroin overdose. He has lost the fight. Now, the amount of people dying from a drug overdose is steadily increasing. In the US, we see that the amount of drug deaths has doubled in a decade, and in 2017, more than 70,000 Americans died of a drug overdose. That's equal to 1/3 of people living in Ghent in one single year. Now, I have been studying addiction, and I've been studying recovery for more than 10 years. I've been talking to drug users, former drug users, their families, prosecutors, judges, treatment providers, policymakers, academics. And one thing I know for sure is that most persons who get addicted to drugs do recover, but it takes time. And the research from Michael Dennis and Christy Scott teaches us that the pathway to stable recovery takes more or less 5 to 7 years. And today, I'm going to tell you how we, so you and I, can be a very crucial part of that pathway to stable recovery. People recover due to a combination of 3 components. Personal components like, I'm getting older and I don't want to die as an addict. Social components like, I've met the woman of my dreams, I want to marry her, so I want to change. And then community components like, the community I'm living in is giving me the opportunities to change. In fact, these are 3 types of love. Self-love, love by others like friends and family and partners, and love by the community. And in the beginning, our research mainly focused on the personal and the social components, but today, we as researchers, we know that what is equally important, or maybe more important, is that love offered by the community, because recovery, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, it happens in our community. The thing is that love offered by the community is a very, very, very difficult one. So I'm going to ask you a question. And you simply can answer that question by raising your hand, or if you don't agree, don't let it be, okay? So the question is, do you want to live next to a drug user in recovery? If you want to live next to one, raise your hand. Okay. Maybe this is a bit biased and I'm a bad scientist now, but the same question has been asked to hundreds of people living in the UK. And that survey in 2015 indicated that more than 50% of citizens, like people like you and I, we don't want to live next to a drug user in recovery. And 2/3 of employers, they said that they don't want to hire a former heroin user, even if that person is fit for the job. So what this survey indicates is that addiction seems to be an irreversible stain, that people in active addiction and people in recovery from addiction, they almost face the same type of stigma and discrimination. People like Peter, they repeatedly told me that landlords and employers, they don't trust them. And even their own family, their loved ones, don't trust them anymore. We, as a community, we systematically fail in providing safety nets like jobs and housing and love. Yet, there are examples of other communities who do a much better job. And an American colleague and very dear friend of mine, Professor Caroline Cooper, she studies how tribes, like Native American tribes, Aboriginals, are dealing with this issue. And she found out that to them, the health of the community is only as strong as the health of its individual members. And when someone from that community gets lost or gets on the wrong track, they intervene as a community by giving that person more strength and more love instead of focusing on the problems that person is experiencing. And believe me, this is very, very different from what I have experienced in working with our Belgian communities, because we focus on the individual and not on the community, and we focus on the risks that the person is facing and will be facing in the future, and not on the strengths. So, don't you think it's time for a drastic shift? Don't you think that we as a community, we should take up our supporting role and act and help people in recovery? I think it is. So, together with my UK colleague and recovery expert, David Best, we have shaped and developed a concept that we describe as inclusive cities. In an inclusive city, the city works together with city council, public and private organizations, welfare, health, people in recovery, citizens, people like you and I are sitting around the table, and they are identifying like the obstacles in the recovery process of their citizens. And today, cities like Ghent, Gothenburg, Doncaster are sitting around a table, and they are thinking about future initiatives that they can implement to foster recovery in their community, in their city. I'll give you 2 inspirational examples that have been deployed in some of these cities. The first one. One of the main characteristics of people who have been using meth or heroin to extremes are their rotten teeth. And you can imagine that this is a physical obstacle. It makes access to jobs and love very difficult. So why can't we, as a city, as a community, work together with dentists to solve this physical obstacle and to erase the signs of the former addiction? Why can't we follow the example of Blackpool? The city of Blackpool works together with a construction company, and they hire persons in recovery to renovate buildings in the city. And once these buildings are renovated, they are rented back to the recovery community. This initiative is called Jobs, Friends and Houses. you don't have to be a dentist, or you don't have to own a construction company to make a change. Even small things matter. And if you're still wondering what you can do to make a change in your community, I will give you 3 small examples, 3 small ideas. First, in the build-up to this conference, I deliberately shared a wrong title of this talk. Never Walk Alone as an Addict. So maybe you think, well, that seems to be a good title. No, it isn't, because there is something wrong with the second part of the title, addict. I'm using very stigmatizing language. And within a couple of hours after this title went online, I received a comment through LinkedIn. And I have to say, I was very happy and relieved that this person raised it, because he was pointing to the essence of my talk. Namely, it takes a village to recover, and the words that we are using is very powerful, and we should opt to choose words that are empowering and strengthening instead of words that are hurting and hindering someone. Second, research tells us that we discriminate more often when we're not familiar with something. So one of the main goals of our inclusive cities concept is that we make recovery visible and that we celebrate it, because we celebrate a lot of things in our lives. We celebrate births, we celebrate marriages, graduations, sweet 16s, but we don't celebrate recovery. We keep it hidden. We keep it silent. And in fact, it's a pity that only the negative consequences of drug addiction seem visible in our communities, like intoxicated people dwelling on the streets or needles in the park. So one of the things that you can do is you can attend, or you can organize yourself, things like recovery weeks or recovery months, including these events. Like the recovery games in Doncaster, they also organize recovery walks and recovery bike rides. The thing is, the community organizes events to bring people from the same community together to celebrate recovery. Third, you could join our community, our online community. David Best and I, we have set up a website, inclusivecities.info. And by simply clicking that button, you could be part of that online love community. We would like to use that website to share ideas and to share evolutions of inclusive cities and different initiatives that have been implemented in all of these cities across the globe. Now, what I want you to remember from this talk is that addiction could happen to all of us. In fact, it could be happening to the person sitting next to you. Nobody wakes up and decides to become a drug user addicted to drug use. Peter didn't. But recovery is possible. And the fact is that nobody should walk recovery alone. And if you know someone who is struggling with addiction or struggling with recovery, you can offer that person some help by finding a job or finding housing or by being a buddy. Or simply go to that person, sit next to him or her and say, "Hey, I'm here, I love you, and you don't have to walk your recovery path alone." Thank you.